You're listening to Stand Out Get Noticed, episode 280. Hi there, Rockstar, and welcome to Stand Out Get Noticed. I'm your host, Christina Canters. I help professionals and business leaders to build powerful communication skills. This is my second last official episode before I go on maternity leave in October. Very exciting and scary. This will be my first major break from the podcast since the show began in March 2015. Can you believe it? It is a bit scary, actually, to be breaking something, as in like breaking like a habit that I've been committed to for so long. But of course, I've made the conscious decision to focus on family and being mum for a while. Just so you know, I've had a very big week, so my voice is getting it's kind of losing my voice a little bit. So I apologize for the croakiness. Now, I am planning to relaunch the podcast with brand new episodes in January 2021. So make sure you subscribe to this show in your podcast app, if you haven't yet already, so you don't miss those new episodes. And also any announcements or maybe a special bonus episode that might come up before then. So make sure you subscribe. Today, in this episode, I'm sharing with you what I've learned from difficult business clients and how this applies to you, whether you're a business owner or an employed professional. So you don't have to be a business owner for this to be relevant for you. Oftentimes, I'm sharing this because oftentimes people in business don't like to talk about their mistakes or where they've failed or, quote, failed. But I always find it really fascinating, which is why I'm sharing these with you today. And hopefully, as a result, you can avoid making the same mistakes or at the very least be more aware of them when they do happen. Because let's face it, we can't avoid making mistakes or having, little failures in life. So I'm going to share with you 5 lessons today. To give you some context up front, for those of you who don't know, I run 2 businesses. So the C Method is my communication skills training and coaching business, which is part of this podcast, and I refer to it in this podcast quite a lot, where I coach professionals and business leaders to develop strong public speaking, communication, and leadership skills. And I also am the CEO of Podcast Services Australia, which is a podcast development and training company that I founded with my husband, Aaron Heath. So they're very different businesses. We work with a lot of big organizations and government clients with Podcast Services Australia. And I'll be sharing some client stories from Podcast Services Australia with you today. I want to be completely honest. I love all my C Method clients, and I honestly don't have a bad client story to tell you for the C Method. I've been very, very fortunate, and I just love all my clients. I've had maybe one client I would consider to be difficult over the years, but that's about it. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But with Podcast Services Australia, we've definitely encountered some clients and even prospects, people who didn't become clients, but dealing with them in that whole process, the quoting process, was, let's say, a little bit painful. But from that, we've learned a lot. So the stories I'll be sharing with you today and referencing are clients to do with clients from Podcast Services Australia. So we had one specific client / prospect recently that we had a very long and drawn out experience with. And I'm going to call them Client A. Client A. So Client A is a huge multinational tech company. They're based overseas, and they reached out to us to help them create a podcast. And at the start, we were so excited. We thought, wow, this huge company, we're talking $1 billion company here, more than $1 billion a year in revenue. We thought they want to work with us. That's amazing. So we did what we would normally do. We quoted them. We got on the phone with them, had a chat about what it is that they wanted, how we could help them, and all seemed to be going really well. We sent them a quote, and then they got back to us with about 10 or 15 questions. And we thought, you know what, they're a big company. They want to cross every T, is that the phrase? Cross every T, dot every I. They want to know all the details. So we diligently answered all their questions, sent it back to them. And then they would send back another list of 10 questions. And then we would diligently answer them. And then we'd think, okay, maybe let's get on the phone with them and have a chat because maybe it's easier to chat with them over the phone. So we did that. And then they went away and came back and then asked us to requote for a different scope. Now, at this point, I'm starting to think, okay, this client, a little bit of hard work. Normally we don't spend this amount of time, this much time simply getting clear on the scope and agreeing on a proposal. But we kept telling ourselves, no, they're a big client. It'd be great to work with them. Let's just go through with it. Let's just keep going. So we requoted, and then of course they had more requests on top of that. They wanted us to bring on video editors. So we had meetings with video editors. We had meetings with marketing companies. We got them to send client A their proposals, had more meetings. Meanwhile, there's no agreement on the job just at that point in time. It was still very much part of that negotiating process. As this went on and on and on, I noticed myself getting more and more frustrated with client A. And in the last two episodes of this podcast, we've been talking about emotional intelligence and how to be more aware of how you react. And I certainly noticed my blood starting to boil a little bit. I thought, man, this is taking a long time. They are really starting to test us here. But we continued to rationalize and saying, no, they're a huge client. They'd be great to work with. This is the way they do business. Let's just get on with it. So finally, we got them to agree to a scope. And then the next step, we thought, oh, fantastic, we've got the job, yay. Then the next step was to go through the procurement process, which is where you get set up on their system as a supplier so that they can pay you. And that, if you've ever done that before with a large company, that was one of the most painful processes I've ever had to go through. Countless emails, countless uploading of documents, then correspondence back from them saying this hasn't been done properly. We also need this. We also need that. Meanwhile, I'm trying to navigate a really clunky, difficult system. I'm spending hours and hours just trying to get registered on their system. Meanwhile, I am getting furious thinking we have done so much work already. Like it felt like a job. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way before, but I mean, obviously they hadn't paid us a cent yet. And we hadn't even started on the job. And I was already feeling so frustrated and annoyed and like it just wasn't worth my time. But of course, we started to think to ourselves, we thought to ourselves, we've come this far, you're not going to pull the pin now. We've almost got the job. Let's go through with it. Let's do it. Not to mention that the procurement team then tried to negotiate us down on price. Again, even though we'd already agreed to one with the initial conversations with the client. So there was a lot of these things going on where I just thought to myself, this doesn't seem right to me. This is not the way that I like to do business. Anyway, fast forward, we get the job, we get through the procurement process, which by the way, they say to us, we're not going to pay you for 90 days. And we thought, okay, standard procedure for a large business, can't say much about it, that's fine. It's not really fine, but we had to go along with it. And then we start the job and we go through the initial strategy session. And then what I find is that there has been a huge misunderstanding about the sort of company that we are. We were halfway through our second strategy session when client A says to us, oh, we thought you were a tech company. And we said, excuse me? We're a podcasting company. And they said, no, well, we hired you because we thought you were a tech company because we're a tech company and we wanted a company who understood these, the content around tech, because the podcast was based around some very specific, in-depth, topics around tech, which we had no idea about, but that's not what we usually pitch ourselves as because we're not a tech company. And in the meeting, they said, no, we thought, isn't podcasting tech? And we said, well, we do the tech behind the podcast, but that's about all we know. the only tech that we really know about. That's it. We never pitched ourselves as a tech company. And client A said to us, well, I am losing some confidence now because we thought you were a tech company. So we're gonna have to think about this. And then we hung up the call. Now at that point, and honestly, there was more to it than that. There were other things that had happened that had really riled me up as well. But at that point, I turned to Aaron and I said, please, God, let them fire us from this job. And Aaron just looked at me and I said, can we fire them? And he said, no, we can't, because they're such a huge company. We've signed a contract with them. We just can't. And so I prayed to the universe, to God, to the spirit, to whoever was listening, please, I do not want to work with this client anymore. And I thought to myself, I don't care how much work we've already done and how many months we've spent trying to get this client or to work with this client. I don't want to anymore. I don't need this anymore. The very next day, we got an email from the client to say, Dear Christina and Aaron, so we are concerned that you are not a tech company. We thought that was your area of expertise, but clearly not. We've decided to pull the pin on the project. And I literally leaped out of my seat with joy. I was so excited. I said, yes, the universe listened and they have fired us. And I can honestly say I've never been so happy to be fired by a client. As difficult as this experience was, I always like to think of difficult situations and experiences that life throws at you. I always like to think of it as an opportunity to learn, because what else are you going to get from it, right? I also thought I could get a great podcast out of this. It was another bonus. But I thought, what can I learn from this? And I started to reflect on it. And I realized a number of things that I want to share with you today. The first thing I want to share with you, and this is, I would say, the most important, is to trust in your intuition. Even from very early on, in our early correspondence with this client, I had this feeling, like this intuitive feeling, that they were not a client I wanted to work with. I just thought, that just doesn't seem right. I don't like the way they're doing business. I don't like the way we're having to go about this. However, it's so interesting. Your rational brain tries to reason and make sense of it with logic. So even though in my heart or in my gut I was feeling that this was not right, my head was saying, oh, but they're such a big client. They'd be great to have, on your client list. Imagine being able to say that you worked with this client, And then also I was thinking, but they would let Aaron down. Aaron wants to work with them. So if you say that you don't want to work with them, they would let Aaron down. So my mind was telling me all of these things to rationalize why I should go ahead, even though in my gut, I knew that it wasn't quite right. And as the time progressed and as things started to happen, more things started to happen and that intuitive feeling of this isn't working, I don't want to work with these people. As that got stronger and stronger, I still ignored it and continued to rationalize it with my brain. And I'm sure you've experienced this before, where maybe you've been in a bad relationship or a bad job. Maybe your workplace was toxic and you knew deep down that it's just not right. But then your mind just tells you, no, but listen to what they're saying. They said that they could change. They said that a promotion's just around the corner. They said that it's just the way they operate and things will get better. And it never does, right? I share more about this in episode 170, where I share the story of how I ended a 7-year relationship and how that really taught me how to trust my intuition and to be more aware of it. And so, obviously it didn't really work in this situation with client A, but it was another really powerful reminder of how important it is to listen to your intuition. Honestly, your gut is always right. The second thing I want to share with you, the second lesson, is that no business is better than bad business. My dad and his dad, so my grandfather was a serial entrepreneur. I didn't get to know him very much. I was only about 5 years old when he passed away. But he and my dad ran a wood turning business for decades, many, many decades. And my dad was telling me stories about my grandfather the other day. And he said to me, you know, your grandfather always said, no business is better than bad business. Yes, you may not be making any money with no business, but at least you then, if you have no business, right? If you have no business, you have the time to then go out and find some good business. Whereas if you're dealing with bad business and having a really difficult time of it, you're desperately unhappy and you're stuck with that bad client and you don't know, and you have no time to go out and find a good client. I started to think to myself, you know, so my rational brain was saying, oh, but they're paying you all this money. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't care. I'd rather not have the money, to be honest. I would rather not have the money and then not have this stress. Also, the fact that I'm coming to the end of my pregnancy, I thought, I don't want to deal with this right now. I'm supposed to be wrapping up. I don't want to have to deal with this added stress. And I realized I'd rather not even have the money. I don't even care about the money anymore. It's just not worth it. And I've seen this happen with people, you know, when you go for a promotion or you get tempted to take on a different job at a different company because of the money. And then you realize that it's the extra money, it just means added stress or added things that you don't really want. It's just not worth it. One of my favorite speeches is by Neil Gaiman, who is a really well-known author of novels and graphic novels, comic books. And he does this amazing commencement speech, which I'll link up in the show notes, which I just love. And one of the things that he said was, nothing I did where the only reason for doing it was the money was ever worth it, except as a bitter experience. I'll say that again because there are a lot of words there. Nothing I did where the only reason for doing it was the money was ever worth it, except as bitter experience. So in his commencement speech, he talks a lot about, you know, doing work that you love and making good art. And, you know, one of those things is don't just take on a job for the money because it's not worth it. The third lesson is to know your values and to stick to them. You know, I'm a communications specialist. For me, communication is a huge value of mine. We really pride ourselves on being upfront in our communication and being really clear and honest with our clients. And it reminds me of another client or prospect that we had who had agreed to a scope. They agreed to our proposal. And then they said, let's get started with our first strategy meeting. So we got started in the strategy meeting and they were talking as if we were already working together. And then at the end of the strategy meeting, they then said, oh, and by the way, your quote's a bit high. Can we renegotiate? And to me, that was not upfront communication. I thought, you have not been honest with us. You should have told us upfront that the quote was out of your budget and you wanted to negotiate before we actually got started, you know, in the actual work. Of course, I'm not saying it's their fault completely. We made an assumption that they were good to go, but still, they were not upfront with that. And as a result of that, I said to Aaron, I do not want to work with this company. I just don't. So this is different. This is not the same company as client A. Let's call them client B. So this is client B. And even though they only wanted a slight discount, to me, it went against my values. It went against my value of strong upfront communication. And what that also communicated to me was that if they were not upfront about this right now at the start of this job, what are they going to be like to work with down the track? There's another great quote. I think it was Derek Sivers who said, or was it Seth Godin? I'll have to find it for you and put it in the show notes, who said, how you do anything is how you do everything. So for example, if you are lazy with I don't know, if you're unkempt and you don't take care of your, physical appearance, and you show up to a client meeting like that, it's an indication that that's how you will perform on the job, that you are going to be sloppy and, late or whatever on the job. So this, to me, working with these clients at the very start, if they show these signs of, not communicating well or not being upfront, not being open and honest, then to me that indicates that that's what they're going to potentially be like for the rest of the job. And that is not something that I wanted to deal with. So even though we didn't, with this client B, even though they didn't really want a lot of a discount, so we weren't really losing out too much in terms of, what they were paying us, the whole principle behind it just didn't agree with me. And I said to Aaron, I don't want to work with them. So we didn't move ahead. Number 4 is to be aware of cultural differences. So this is something that this was a great lesson for me, or for us, because we had never worked. So with client A, they were based overseas, and we'd never worked with a company of this size who were based in this particular part of the world. And we treated them just like any other client that we would work with. The same process, we made this, we communicated the same. And after it all went down, I remember speaking to a friend of mine, Mel, who she was actually on the podcast the other week. And she said to me, oh, Christina, I know people who've worked with companies from this particular part of the world. And she went on to explain how, she said, there's a very specific way in how they do business. This doesn't necessarily mean that, 1 + 1 does not necessarily equal 2. And you need to be aware of that. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's interesting. I never even considered that. So I'm not saying that the miscommunication was all the fault of client A, right? Because communication's always two-way, all right? I'm not saying, oh no, everything was wrong with them. It was not, because we had not taken into consideration that the cultural differences. And we simply had not had experience with dealing with companies from this particular part of the world. And so this was a huge, learning opportunity for us. And now, if I was to work with another company from that part of the world, I would seek out someone else who had also who'd had experience in that area, and ask them, what are the protocols? How do they normally work? What do we look out for? And I'm sure if we'd done that beforehand, it would have helped us a lot with client A. So that is something that, I take full responsibility for. We simply weren't aware of the cultural differences, and I will endeavor to do that next time. And it's the same in your workplace. If you're working with people or working in a company that is a different culture to yours, then to be aware of that not everyone communicates the same or has the same definitions of words, or, just because they say one thing, it might mean another, and that's okay, because that's just the way they communicate. So, a lot of really, great lessons here. Oh, and the final thing I want to share with you today is how important it is to learn from your mistakes. So I treated this whole experience as a learning experience. Like I said at the start, if I was just to take this as a failure or a bad experience, a bitter experience, then it's not really helping me. It's not very constructive. So I encourage you, if you do have let's say, I don't want to say bad experience, it's a quote, difficult experience or a challenging experience with a client or a colleague or in a relationship or whatever it is, a family member, take a step back and reflect and go, okay, this happened. How did I react? What could I have done better? And what have I learned from this? And that's going to help you from making the same mistakes again, and you'll be in a much more informed position to take action and handle yourself better next time. So those were some of the things I wanted to share with you around this very, I'm going to say, interesting experience we had with this client. And I must say, I'm very happy now. It's very nice to be back working with the clients that we love. And, oh, I forgot to mention this. Yes, it also, the whole experience, this is a bonus one for you, it made me so grateful for all the wonderful clients that we do work with. I'm just going to say that like I said, with my C Method clients, I love all of them. Love them, love them. They are the best. And with our Podcast Services Australia clients, they are also the best. And we love them to bits as well. And we get to work with amazing clients because we set clear boundaries and we know what our values are, and we make sure that we work only with clients that who resonate with us and we resonate with them, and we really believe in what they're doing, and vice versa. So there's a lot to be said about getting clear on, who it is you want to work with, what you believe in, what your values are, what your boundaries are, what you put up with, what you don't put up with. And this relates to you. I don't care if you're a business owner, a consultant, an employed professional, a student, whatever it is. If you know who you are and what you stand for and what your values are, you can then communicate this and draw that line in the sand when someone, so you encounter someone that just does not work for you, you can say, no, I'm putting my foot down. This is not what I deal with. This is not who I am, and I do not deal with people like you. And that's totally okay. And I'm very proud to say that is the basis by which I run both my businesses. And it's meant that I get to work with amazing people. We get to work with beautiful clients who, it's so fulfilling working with them and helping them to achieve whatever it is that they want. It's just so fulfilling. And it makes, so having the odd, negative, let's call it, experience with a prospect or a client really makes me grateful for all the wonderful clients that we do get to work with. So I hope that didn't end up being a little bit ranty, but as you can hear, I feel very strongly about this. I will put links to those resources that I mentioned, the other podcast and Neil Gaiman's commencement speech in the show notes. It will be at thecmethod.com/280. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with a colleague or a friend so that they can also benefit from learning from my mistakes as well. All right, Rockstar, thank you for spending some time with me today. I will talk to you next week for the last time before I go on maternity leave. I'm Christina Canters, and this has been Stand Out, Get Noticed.